Hello, nerds! Welcome to the Geek Girl Story Salon, where I talk to creatives from across disciplines and across the world about the art of storytelling. I'm your host, Jen Jackalone, lifelong storyteller and head geek in charge. We've got some great guests coming up, like Cullen Bunn, writer of the Harrow County Comics, and Tony Giroux of Motherland Fort Salem. So be sure to smash that like and subscribe button to stay up to date on the heaping helpings of brain food coming your way, courtesy of our partners, fleetoffandoms.com and Ilva Publishing, an independent publisher for women's fiction. My guest today is a New York Times bestselling author who's made contributions to a great many of the franchises you know and love: Trek, Doctor Who, Blake 7, Firefly, and also a body of original work, particularly one called The Undefeated that I'm really hoping to talk about today. We're going to go deep, then we're going to go geek. Please welcome to the salon, Una McCormack.
Hi, thank you for having me. Much appreciated. And thank you for that nice welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to talk to you for a lot of reasons. A friend of mine actually pleaded with me to see if I could get you to come on the show. So she's going to be very excited too.
Oh, I'm always happy. If people ask, I'm always happy.
Well, I really appreciate it. Not only to talk to you as an author, but as a fellow fan of all these wonderful properties that have kind of made their homes in our lives and our hearts.
Yeah.
I need to just start by saying you're basically living the dream.
I know.
It's on so many levels, but certainly like as fanfic writers. Do I have the story correct? Basically, someone found a DS9 fic of yours and like yoinked you out of the fandom to write something. That's
pretty much what happened. Yeah, I know. Wow. I know. Wow. It was a lot of things. Right place, right time. Lots of things were going on, and it just happened. Yeah, and like my friend Jim Swallow, who also writes Star Trek books, says, this never happens. Except to Una. Yes, that's true.
Wow. That's, and I'd like to talk specifically about fanfic because that's where I cut my teeth as a writer. I think that's where a lot of writers do.
Absolutely.
But what did you come to fanfic writing already kind of having a background in writing, or was that sort of where you did most of your growth?
That's where I did almost all of my growth. So I think some of us are instinctively sort of embroiderers in that way. That's really how we find and tell story. So I started writing little Blake 7 stickman cartoons when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Yeah, I was doing little comic strips. So that would be years ago. That was in 1980. So that was a long time ago. And then I just kept telling little Blake 7 stories to myself. And my oldest sister was a Blake 7 fan, about 10 years older than me, and would bring fanzines back from conventions. So they were impossibly older than me at the time, like 20, you know. And these zines would come back, and sometimes I would be allowed to, be in the same room as these zines and maybe even touch them. So from a very early age, I had a sense of fan fiction as a thing that, existed and could be done. And I got into it myself when I was, joined Horizon, the Blake 7 fan club, when I was about 16. So again, I was still in the 1980s here. So really, before the World Wide Web, not before the internet, but before the World Wide Web, I was sort of writing stuff and putting it in zines. And then, of course, once I got online, which was sort of in the mid-90s, what's the first thing you do is you find a Blake 7 fan fiction mailing list. Of course. So so that's what I did. Although I'd already had something published by then. I had a short story published in Doctor Who magazine around about 1993. So from quite early on, I was sort of, putting this stuff out there. But yeah, the Star Trek commission was purely that I'd been writing for a while, so my style was competent to decent. They were looking to commission new voices, I think, because an anniversary was coming up. I'd used my own name, which with hindsight is naivety, but worked out pretty much okay for me. So all these things came together, and when they were looking to commission, I was recommended. So yeah, fan fiction was where I started, and where I learned to write, particularly in Blake Seven fandom, as I think many people do. Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing that I find to be very true. There's lots and lots of very good fan fiction. And you know, I mean, just as a practice, I will definitely die on the hill to defend it, because
God, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's not any different than any other genre of writing, I guess, in terms of there's an awful lot of absolute, cringe-worthy material. And there's a fair amount of decent stuff, and then there's, like any other genre, a few things, a few people doing it that are really, really excellent.
Really, some really spectacular stuff there,
Yes.
really, and that can push shows in a way that they can tell stories about texts that, particularly with a commercial corporate property, the studio wouldn't go there, or the studio couldn't go there, or the franchise couldn't or wouldn't go there, or they're not the stories that the author wants to tell, or they critique something about the author. It's that, so provided you're not making money out of it, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I very much appreciate is, the authors like Neil Gaiman, who are like, yeah, go ahead, write fanfic, send it to me. God.
Yeah. Well, he's particularly good about that. I think historically there's sort of been people haven't wanted to read fiction sort of set in their own worlds, just for, I think there was a court case, wasn't there, or something.
There was.
Yeah, with Marion Zimmer Bradley, I think, who opened up a world, and then I think it got complicated. But all these things, that's great. I didn't know Gaiman sort of said send it to me. So I don't read just because I think when it's not my own property, I'm working in franchises that somebody else owns. It's just an extra layer of complication. So once I start writing commercially in a franchise, I sort of stay away, which means I can happily keep on writing Tolkien fan fiction. That's never going to happen. Much as I have tried, I've pitched and pitched.
Have you really?
I really want to do a novel based on Rings of Power, but I think that would be the way to do it. But I think it's pretty complicated, isn't it? You imagine though. Oh, yeah. in this, who else has written in this franchise? Tolkien.
That's it.
So, if they're going to do it, they better commission me.
Well, I'm manifesting that for you. So.
Oh, please, yeah. If we could kind of get a kind of global manifestation going, then
prayer circle or whatever we do, burn some kitchen spices and
seance, raise the man himself to
candles,
give him my blessing.
Candles, absolutely.
That's what we like to hear.
So well, because one of the things I was going to ask, is there a franchise that you would like to write for that you haven't written yet? So that would be it. That would be it. Anything? What are you reading in terms of? And we'll talk about books like outside of the realm of fic later. But in terms of fan fictions, like what are you reading these days?
I'm not reading as much as I used to. That's certainly true. I think partly because I'm doing a lot of other stuff that involves a lot of reading, and I just run out of time. So I'm nowhere near up to speed. I used to read a lot. What I pretty much read now are I have a handful of friends, and we all write Tolkien fan fiction together. And writing Tolkien fan fiction is quite, even then it's quite a big, world. So we are quite narrowly focused on Gondor and Minas Tirith at the end of the Third Age and the start of the Fourth. So we share stories, and again, I'm not writing as much as I used to. I think I tend to go through bursts of finding a new storytelling vein, and then really, really want to sort of mine that vein. So I'm reading my friends at the moment, but I'm not reading anywhere near, just because I find a lot of the day is taken up with staring at text, and then it actually isn't relaxing. to then read fan fiction, which is a shame. I'm sure something will hit. I always say, oh, I'm too old now. I don't feel things as intensely as I used to. And I just know that if I said that, then I'll turn on the TV in about 18 months, a new show will arrive, and I will go, but no, they have done this completely wrong. I must fix it. I think as well, when it becomes your job, you know, if you're spending your working day thinking about what Rafi might be up to that she's not doing on screen, then that urge to kind of read perhaps isn't as strong because you're getting to do it anyway. Right. So I don't read as much as I used to, but I do miss it.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that. I think it works like that oddly for me too. Like I'll get into a thing, I'll get into a property, and then, you know, I'll get a lot out of it, and then I'll find I'm kind of exhausted on it. I mean,
burned out. Yeah,
it's like, okay, I've gotten whatever I'm going to get out of this.
And you never know what it's going to be. So, you know, I watch people sort of suddenly find Blake Seven, like, you know, in the last couple of years. Really? And you go, well, yeah. You go, with the best one in the world. I love my mad old show, but it's not the fastest paced.
No, it's not.
But somebody just sees something in it and it speaks to them, and you go and look and find the fan fiction. The fan fiction was always a pretty solid standard in that fandom. And that's it. You're in. I guess with Deep Space Nine as well. I'm sure there must be tons of stuff. And I think a lot of people rewatch things like DS9 and Voyager in lockdown. I think DS9 and Voyager in particular really spoke to people. You know, I suspect people are watching it. That in fact, I joined Tumblr recently because Twitter was, I think it was the end of last year. And Twitter was melting down. I thought, I've got to get some other homes. So I went over to Tumblr and I inadvertently spoiled Deep Space Nine for someone. Watching it for the first time, I said something about an episode. They went, hang on a minute. Oh no. I thought, 30 years on, we'd all be safe. Right. Okay. I won't do that on Tumblr again. There are young people here.
There are very, Tumblr. Yeah. Yeah, there's a very young side of Tumblr that hasn't seen these shows.
So but I shall be good about spoilers about everything in future.
I try, but honestly, with the older shows, it's hard.
Yeah, it's
really hard. It's like, okay, it's been 30 years. I'm sorry if you haven't seen it by now.
Yeah, and at the same time, I always make sure that I don't spoil Blake Seven. Because I think, the ending is so special that if you've managed to get this far, you want to watch that cold, I think. Stone cold.
Yep. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, DS9, I think you're right. I do feel like it's sort of had a little renaissance during lockdown. Just because there's so much stuff in there about power and authority, and and those
the guys at Sid City did a great job as well. I think Alexander Siddig was running running weekly salons, wasn't he? So and I think that got a lot of people through lockdown, and that kind of community building, I think, really helps. They did an incredible job and performed some fan fictions actually that were written for them. So it had that lovely renaissance then where, I think people wanted to connect with something they loved and feel that they were with people that, supported them and shared that interest. And then Voyager, obviously, being cut off from family, being kind of, in a small space together. I think they really spoke to people in lockdown, which was, good. These things are there to, it's what art's for.
Absolutely. I mean, for my son, it was Dungeons and Dragons.
Really?
That became his community during lockdown, and he became a dungeon master and started telling these stories in
brilliant. Yeah. And doing it in Zoom sessions. Exactly. I think Warhammer had a similar renaissance as well. I think Warhammer is one of the few British industries that did well during the pandemic. Quite understandable.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
But yeah, I mean, even now, there are still a lot of people actually being drawn into these older shows by reading fan fiction, because people are still making new fan fiction for this, for all of these series.
Yep.
Like that's like there are people who've been, AO3 is sort of now the central universe for there are other places, but AO3 is really kind of the place. And
of course, something like Star Trek with Strange New Worlds happening, you're sort of being directed back to those original characters. You've got Kirk and Spock on screen right now doing stuff. So you know what we're all like. You might come to Kirk and Spock through Strange New Worlds. You're going to go straight back and watch the source, aren't you? You're going to get up to speed on everything as far as you can now that Prodigy isn't available.
Well, yeah. I'm super salty about that. I can't talk about it.
I'm really sad about it too. I was saying to a friend the other day, it's like when the BBC destroyed all those master tapes of things, and he was saying he thinks it's worse because at least the BBC needed the videotapes. There was a reason those tapes were wiped. It was because they were running out of space.
Right.
Whereas this is just seems to be accounting. Really sad. I hope it gets picked up because it's a lovely little show. It's just lovely. Proper Star Trek, Yeah. So anyway, but fingers crossed for that one. But yeah, as I say, if people are watching Strange New Worlds and that's their first, or Discovery, actually, if you came into Star Trek from Disco, you're going to go, well, who's this Spock guy? Want to know more about this? Who's this Sarek? There might be a good episode about him.
That's the thing. That's the wonderful thing. There's a lot of wonderful things about Trek, but that's one of the wonderful things about Trek is that, there's look at all this content we have. There's just like these worlds that you can really just swim in for a long time, and I think that's one of the, and I'm not a Star Trek versus Star Wars person.
Oh no,
at all. But I think that's one thing that's really great about Star Trek is there is so much.
Exactly, and also it was up until now it was possible to see it all. You might have to kind of. I mean, here in the UK, I can pretty much watch everything on Netflix of the old series. Fingers crossed, doesn't go. Whereas obviously with Doctor Who, you get hooked, but there's no way you're ever gonna, because it doesn't exist. So there's always this. You'll never quite get to completion with Doctor Who. But with Star Trek, I can remember the moment where I got to the end of it last year. I think there were a couple of short treks I hadn't seen, and I managed to source them and finally watch them. And there was just this: I have now seen Star Trek. Quest completed. Oh, hang on, new season of Picard. So yeah, we better get to see those Prodigy episodes somehow.
Yeah, well, hopefully someone will license them or something.
Surely. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about, or I want to talk about Picard actually, because I did read Second Self, and I love the way you write Raffi.
Thank you. I really like Raffi. Yeah.
I went through actually a little evolution with Raffi because when I first met her, it was like, oh God, she's so messy, and it kind of, it was very jarring for me. It sort of put me off. And then at some point I realized that I was having that reaction because I disliked what was messy in myself. And it was like a switch flipped, and I became the person who, will flip tables for, if anything should happen to Raffi.
Yeah. Well, that is really interesting because my route into Raffi was when I was writing my first Picard book, which is The Last Best Hope, which is a prequel to season 1. And it's set while they're on the relief mission to Romulus. So we see Raffi as an officer. And a lot of what's happening to her in that book, which we see on screen, it's kind of text by the time we see her on screen, is the breakdown of her marriage because she's putting this mission ahead of family. And I was writing this book. We had quite a tight deadline on it, so I was spending a lot of time saying to my little girl, "Mummy promises this is nearly done." So what was messy about me is kind of messy about Raffi. So she has this sort of she's flawed, but she's not. How do I put this? She's flawed, but it doesn't make her an. I don't know how much I can swear. I'll swear Britishly. She's flawed, but it doesn't make her an arsehole. Yeah. She's flawed, but it doesn't make her a jerk. Yeah, you could cut to that if you need to edit. I could only think of my British swears. So the flaws are there, but they don't disfigure her in a way. That possibly I'd feel differently if I was her husband or a kid. But I think her heart is always on her sleeve. She's very vulnerable. She's very open. I think she does everything in good faith. There's just a
great. There's a fundamental decency.
That's it. Exactly that. She won't be out to get you or out to trick you or to make you fail. There may be subterfuge, obviously, she's an intelligence officer, but there's not cruelty, I think, in any way.
No. It's interesting that she's an intelligence officer and yet she has so much out on her sleeve, that she's just so out there with everything.
Yeah, I kind of had her more as an analyst, to be honest, in my mind, who of course said desk job rather than an undercover job. And then in season 3 maybe we see this different side of her, and that could be born of experience of sort of leaving Starfleet and effectively living rough and having this very different side to her. So it'd be much more desk job I'd give her in Last Best Hope. I think we see her on a mission. We see her as an expert in Romulan affairs. Right. But I can certainly see that part of her as well. She could convincingly present as a drug addict, and all these things. So all these things I think could be facets of her personality. I would say the scenes with her and Worf are probably amongst my favourite in that season of Picard. It was a very well judged pairing and a really good pair of actors too. I think Michelle Hurd's terrific.
Well, I have to talk about Michelle Hurd because she is just a lovely human. I have a project where basically I write poems for the Star Trek characters, and when I can, I get the actors to read them.
Oh, wow.
And Michelle was one of my first readings.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really good.
Raffi and Worf I came out of season 3 wanting a spin-off where they, ride around the galaxy in a van solving mysteries.
I could watch that show. Yes. And it should be a van. Yeah,
absolutely.
He could snore in the passenger seat on the definitely watch that.
I have this sort of headcanon, I guess, about Klingons really liking using Raffi's full name. Raphael.
Yes.
And I had that before I saw them as a pair. And like when he addressed her that way, like internally I did a little dance. Like I knew it.
Like the kid in Galaxy Quest. I knew it was true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was very well judged and very tender performance between them, I think. Beautifully done.
Yeah.
So, and always good to see Michael Dorn back.
Yeah, I was very happy with season 3 in general. There were a few what felt like plot holes to me, or things that didn't quite make sense toward the end as it
Yeah.
started hurtling toward the finale.
Yeah.
But all the way through, I felt like, they kept the tension really high, and they did keep the mystery kind of burning.
An obvious love for the source material as well, I think. All huge, incredible attention to everything. It's good to see how well it's been, how loved it's been, I think. And I hope people are going to enjoy this season of Strange New Worlds as well. Yeah.
I'm very happy so far.
Good. I
think it was sort of interesting that that they decided to address the issue of passing privilege with a white woman.
I sort of that's interesting.
My initial reaction was but I kind of came down on the side of no, that's actually a really interesting idea. That's not necessarily a bad way to go.
And not a white woman articulating the case in court, of course. So the lawyer is articulating the case. So nuanced, interesting ways, and very, very Star Trek. I thought, it felt like something that you could have seen in the original series and in Next Gen, actually. So I'm very fond of Strange New Worlds. I think it's probably my favourite of all the new shows. Though I'm obviously I love Lower Decks very much.
Of course. Well, I'm excited about the Strange New Worlds Lower Decks crossover. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm sure it will deliver.
I have no doubt.
They've got the right instincts, these guys. They know what they're doing, I think. It's going to be great.
I mean, I would have to agree with you that it is definitely the best of the new shows. Picard, I love Picard. I'm sort of conscious of its issues or whatever, but I really do love it. And, if I had to do the tier listing, Disco probably comes in at the back, but they've all brought something new and interesting.
And of course, Disco's what gave us all these shows. There wouldn't be, we wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't have any of this if Disco hadn't done well. Exactly that. And when you go back to Disco and they're learning to make Star Trek again, I think we've got to remember that they're learning to make it again, and they're learning to make it. So one of the mistakes that they did with Doctor Who back in the 90s was that they tried to overcomplicate it with its old backstory. So there wasn't really a way in for people who had never seen the show. And that's the thing that Russell T Davies gets so right when he brings it back. And I think Disco does a little bit of that, but then starts to find its feet and starts saying, no, we've got to make this show stand on its own terms. And but at the same time, having Spock there helps. So they're kind of learning to do Star Trek again and learning the way to do it for now and all these things. And it's a few faltering footsteps, but I think they get it. And also the other thing about Disco is that everyone is so good in it. All of the cast are just brilliant. I don't think anyone puts in a bad performance. So we wouldn't have anything else if it hadn't worked. There wouldn't be Picard. There wouldn't be Strange New Worlds. There wouldn't be Prodigy. We wouldn't have had Peanut Hamper. Now that's a live action I'd like to see.
Right.
And the owl guy. I'm there for that.
Oh my word. But you've done a little Disco, haven't you?
I've done 2 Disco novels. I've done one about Tilly. It's a young adult novel called Away to the Stars, all about her decision to join Starfleet. And then I did a discovery called Wonderlands, which is there's a bit at the start of season 3 of Discovery where Michael Burnham is alone in the future for a year, and it covers that year. So it's a sort of I wrote it like an extra season of Disco, or half season, mini season. Yeah.
I've got to get to that because I have so many questions about what happened in that year.
It's all in that book.
And they're all in that book.
And mostly it's her and Book being they're a great screwball couple, so it's a bit Beatrice and Benedict from Much Ado, or Nick and Nora. They've got great screwball quality to them. So I honestly want to. They're a couple. They're a pair of characters that once you kind of wind them up, they just go on the page, which is quite good because it was lockdown and I was quite tired. So so it's nice when the characters take on the work. Yeah. But the book basically covers that year and it gives you a little sort of story arc for it. We see a little bit more of I'm blanking on his name now. The character we see at the very start of that episode, the guy who's waiting for them in his office. Blanked on the character's name. So he becomes more of a character in that as well. The guy is waiting and kind of putting up the flag and that kind of thing. I think we only see him in one episode. But he's more of a character in it as well. So it was a fun book to write. Yeah, I had quite you've got quite a clear canvas. It was an interesting gap, because it's nothing on screen, and then you basically go, whoa, I've got all this stuff I need to do, but it all needs to be completely wrapped up, because none of that can be on screen by the time you pick up with season 3. So good fun.
So how do you do you have Canon compliance people that you have to run the stuff by? And
absolutely,
tell me about that process, because I am dying to write Trek at some point. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I want to know, what is that process like?
So generally what happens is, there's sort of you've got the studio who obviously own it, and then the books are licensed to Simon and Schuster, who the Gallery Books range imprint, who publish. They do the editorial. So what happens is that generally what happens now is that they come to me, the guys at Simon and Schuster, and say, right, this is our sort of lineup for the year. Would you like to do let's do Second Self. So we've got a space for a new Picard novel, probably including this character who hasn't had much book time. How do you fancy it? And I say, yes, that would be lovely, because obviously you do, because you'd be a fool. And then what happens is that usually, depending where we are in the production schedule, I might see scripts in advance, because we know where the book is going to be set, but I need a bit of context for that. So certainly with the prequel one, I was reading season 1 Picard scripts as they were kind of arriving, and this one I think I saw. I think season 2 had gone out, and we were sort of setting it after that. I may have seen some season 3 scripts, can't quite remember now. And I sort of come up with some rough ideas. And then what we do is we check in with the studio. And in particular, we check in with a writer called Kirsten Beyer, who wrote a lot of Voyager novels, and then became a co-creator of Picard, and has written scripts for Picard and Strange New Worlds. But because she knows the book range, what we generally do then is that we kind of work up a sort of idea for what the book might do. So I'll say, I've got a few ideas here, and then we kind of work something up. I take a lot of notes, and then I go and write an outline. And then that kind of gets passed and forth, goes back to the studio to make sure that I'm not, covering ground that they're going to be covering, but I don't know about. And then we sort of get writing. They sign that off. We come up with some deadlines. I panic. I start writing. I deliver a book. But in terms of what you were asking about, checking facts. So I also did a book called The Autobiography of Spock, and with Titan Books. And for that, we knew that we were not only were going to bring in the movies and the original series, they wanted to bring in some of the stuff from Disco as well. So it was quite complicated. Yeah, it really was quite complicated. It had to touch on things like, episodes in Next Gen that he was in, and the animated series. we got that in as well. We got Yesteryear in as well. So and what I did then was, well, absolute fan fiction writer tricks you up a little timeline, all these sorts of things, check your notes, write little bios, this sort of thing. But we have an absolutely brilliant guy called Dayton Ward, who's a sort of consultant for the show. He's written a lot of Star Trek books as well, and he knows everything that has happened on screen. He just remembers it. So if I make a stupid mistake or get a fact wrong, Dayton will say, I think you will find, Dr. McCormack, that's XYZ. I will go, thank you very much. You have saved me from eternal infamy. So they have a brilliant guy there who Dayton knows absolutely everything. Is absolutely brilliant. So there's multiple kind of ways that people are sort of saying, not that, how about this? Don't forget that. Are you going to mention this? I think it's important, and I think other people will. So there's lots of sort of external people keeping an eye on things, but it's super collaborative. It really brings home how writing, even book writing, is really quite a collaborative process. And then editorial kind of, sorts out my typos and bad sentences. Right. So that's sort of what happens. But yeah, hopefully that demystifies it a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just sort of curious, exactly, okay, how do you make sure that this stays within what has happened and what's going to happen? And
yeah. And it was when we were doing the sort of so before the shows came out, we were doing the books that kind of became known as beta canon or the lit verse, I think. All of which got wrapped up. That had got really complicated in its own right. And what I did was that I kind of planted my flag on Cardassia Prime. Yeah. Lads, I said, this is mine. Okay. You do what you want and I'll take care of this. So I kept myself sort of in a patch that I knew quite well. But we did a 5-book series with that range. We did a sort of great series that involved 5 writers. And as I recall, there was quite a complex spreadsheet at one point. So we people keep an eye on this kind of thing, and they know that people like it to work. So all to fix together. So we work quite hard to make that happen.
Excellent. There any fandoms or any IPs that you would like to write for that you haven't yet? Besides Lord of the Rings?
Besides Lord of the Rings. I think I've done pretty all right, actually. I think Firefly was sort of the big one that I really wanted to do. I would have, when it was on screen, I would have loved to have done a spin-off. There was a TV series called Rome.
The HBO one.
Yeah. I would have loved to have done a spin-off novel of that. I mean, there are primary sources and stuff and lots of novels about that. But I think I've done all right, actually. I think my kid would like me to do a Star Wars book. But I don't know enough about Star Wars. I don't know I don't know as much as my kid, for one. And there are people who really know a lot about Star Wars. But I think if I did a Star Wars book, I'd be leveling up in my kid's eyes. So I've got a shelf behind me that's all of my books and a load of feminist science fiction. And then at the top, there are all the books by 2 of my favourite writers, who are Lois McMaster-Bujold and Vonda McIntyre, who wrote some Star Trek books. And then underneath that, there are like 3 shelves of my books. And Vonda McIntyre did a load of did 5 Star Trek books, 1 Star Wars novel. I'm not kidding. My kid came in, she's kind of looking at the shelves of my name, yeah. And she went, "Oh, look, there's a Star Wars book." Flipping out. The eyes just lasered in on it. It's top really high up as well. Oh yeah, saw the Star Wars book. Nothing with like Una McCormack. No interest. It's just a thing Mummy does that, means she can't come and do things with me. Yeah, so it's probably Star Wars. If I knew
Yeah.
a bit more, I think
Yeah.
I'd enjoy doing something, maybe something for Andor. That's sort of my sweet spot. But they're doing such a good job. I've written an essay about Andor, which is like writing fan fiction.
Yeah. Well, Star Wars is very tricky because
Yeah,
there's all the extended universe novels, and nobody's really sure what's canon and what's not,
it's
and
really
it's
complicated now, isn't it?
very
Yeah.
messy. I
I
mean,
think you just can't worry about that. You've got to treat it like Arthurian legends, and okay, we've got this corpus of work. We've got this. Somebody else picked it up and did their thing with it. You've just got to read it like that now, I think, and just not worry. But yeah, I mean, even within Tolkien, there are sort of different cycles of, do those Balrogs have wings? What's the true story of Galadriel? And he never really resolves it because he tells different versions of it. So that's just one guy. So so I think with Star Wars now, you just have to not worry. And at least it's good that the Star Trek beta canon got that kind of send off. They were able to wrap things up. I think that was really good. I know that the publishers and the studio really wanted to make that work because it had been such a long cycle of books. And I think it would have been really frustrating for people just to it off. So good they made a really good decision there, I think. But we'll see with Star Wars. Maybe Andor. I should probably see if I can do that.
yeah. Star Wars at this point feels like they're writing fanfic of their own property or something.
Yeah, it's I don't think I missed anything. I'm up to date now, I think. There's not been a new season of. I've seen a new season of Mandalorian. I've not seen there's a couple of I've not seen Clone Wars, which I understand from my sources is by which I mean my 9-year-old is a superior show, and I really ought to watch it.
Well,
But
I have to agree with your 9-year-old.
yeah, doesn't mess around, that kid. They know what they're about. But Andor, I thought, particularly the last half of that season, I thought was some of the best television I'd seen in a while. There we are. I knew there was something which had pressed all my buttons. It's a bit like Blake 7, but with budget. Yeah.
So I want to get to the Undefeated, because that was, one of those books that kind of stuck with me after I read it, and I was sort of thinking about it and kind of batting it around. It's an interesting critique of economic imperialism, which could apply to America or you guys. But your main character, Monica, is this journalist who made her name writing stories about the damage of that imperialism on this galactic scale, and people and cultures having a new government and culture sort of forced on them, and yet it wasn't quite it didn't take really till the very end. There's this entire slave class, the Ginger, and even with her childhood experiences and her watching, all these cultures being crushed by the imperialism, it seemed like she hadn't internalized the injustice that was being done to the Ginger as being parallel to what she was watching out on the front lines.
Yeah. I think it is a book about maybe our own blindnesses in our own thinking, or things that we don't permit ourselves to see truthfully. Perhaps I'm always really happy when people mention this book, because I'm always convinced nobody read it. But then people who do liked it, so that's quite gratifying, because I don't do sort of non-franchise stuff very often. So when I do, it's it feels particularly special, because it feels like it's a little a little closer to me, perhaps. Yeah, so I wanted a character who I don't know, maybe it's about I guess it's a book about liberal feminism in many ways. You know, there are limits to what liberal feminism can do, and often it reaches a point where it retrenches from true radicalism, and becomes quite small c conservative, actually. So I think it was a book maybe reflecting on some of that. Though we are as close to a radical as we can get with Monica. She's loosely based on Martha Gellhorn, but very loosely based. So and it was interesting to write a female character of that age. I think she's not a young woman. She's experienced and has had a life. And I enjoyed writing it, but I think those sort of blindnesses, the way we kind of fool ourselves about ourselves, and perhaps don't necessarily so in some ways, just to be able to function in the world. But I think ultimately she can't. She's too honest not to be honest about herself and her flaws and what she's missed and what she's consciously not allowed herself to notice. So I think that's what the book's about. I think so. I pitched it as feminist high plains drifter in space.
Okay.
Which is a great elevator pitch.
It is.
Feminist high plains drifter in space. I'll have that.
Well, and I did have that. So
good.
and it was very good.
Thank you.
How do you want us, the readers, to feel about her?
I think that's the reader's business, really.
Okay.
You never know what readers how they're going to take a book. I mean, if you're deeply immersed in someone like that, you as the writer naturally become sympathetic. I guess. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to Garrick, and he's not a nice person, you know, but I've spent a lot of time in his consciousness. And Monica doesn't do anything anywhere as near egregious as the kind of many egregious things that Garrick does. But as a writer, you can't help but, it's very rare that I'm inside a character's head and I don't end up empathizing. I'll say empathizing, distinct from sympathizing. So, but ultimately, I can't. That has to be for the reader to decide what they've taken from that character, or what they should feel. What did you feel about her, as a matter of interest?
I liked her. She's somebody that if she were a real figure, I would find her interesting. I'm a fan of, that sort of old school class of female journalists, like when used to be, you didn't see Christiana Amanpour on TV unless there was stuff blowing up behind her, and she gave me sort of vibes of that. But anytime it went back to her interactions with the ginger, like whether it was her guy, Gail, or all the sort of backstory that was getting filled in about her family, it was always this moment of
and she's young in that backstory. I think that's important to remember. She's quite young. There's a novel I admire very much by a writer called Sybil Bedford, called a Compass Error. And it's about a 17-year-old girl who makes a very bad error of judgment, which jeopardizes her mother's remarriage and throws her life off course, throws the girl's life off course, a compass error. And I think I had that at the back of my, it's sort of mistakes or decisions that we make or have to make when we don't really know enough about the world or have experience enough about the world to be able to make those decisions, and yet they're made, and our life is going to be shaped by them in some way. So that's another kind of story I had at the back of my mind, and then a difficult mother-daughter relationship in that story as well. I think the mother's not very likable.
Yeah, no, the mom's pretty dreadful.
Yeah. And I always try to be careful about that, because you don't want to be dealing in low-hanging fruit. But I think that's a character who's made certain accommodations with the world, and has particular blinkers on, and can never step out of them, because too much would come tumbling down. And the book is about things coming tumbling down.
It is.
Yeah. I should write more in that setup. I've got a lot of sort of stories in my head about that.
Well,
I've got a short story published set in that kind of milieu. But I can see more novellas easily doing. I don't think there'd be something novel length, but I think novellas would suit it.
I would read that, because I mean, I came away with, well, first of all, I came away wishing I had more, I guess, lore about how the ginger, like how that happened, how they happened, and how that started.
Yeah.
Like the way you did it, I was able to sort of pick up enough that I understood the situation, and that felt like a very deliberate choice of how much you kind of spooled out and when. But the frankly, the geek in me is like, okay, but when did this start, and how did this start, and how did they, so can you share anything about that without ruining
goodness, it's a while since I've sort of there's a sort of long backstory on Earth. I've got a large part of a novel written about a sort of character who has an exodus from Earth. I know more about the how the sort of rebellion starts. I've got quite a long novel. I've got large sections of a novel written on that. As for ginger, I sort of see it as I don't know. I think I saw it as a sort of standard thing that people needed to work, so they agree to these enhancements, but the enhancements are expensive, so it sort of got them into debt. And then the people who who owned the technology or the biotechnology had them into kind of hock, and from that you kind of rapidly get into a sort of indentured labor scenario. So in many ways, almost the sort of creation of that society, I suppose I wasn't interested in, because it's the kind of thing you see all the time, you see people put on zero contracts and how having to service a certain kind of debt locks you deeper into that kind of debt. So almost in a way, the creation of that, I wasn't so interested as much as the ramifications of it, and the what it did for people within that setup, how it corroded them, or how it altered them, or how they accommodated to living in it. There is a sort of revolution story in my head, but you can sort of see that happening in the Undefeated. It's not the main story.
No, but it's an undercurrent, and it has a really powerful. It sort of comes to a very powerful punch at the end, where she makes the decision to do what she does.
Yes, and I think we read lots of books, or we can read lots of books about rebellions and resistance movements and these sorts of things. But I wanted to capture, and the novella form kind of demanded this, I think. Capture the experience of that small cast and that individual in this moment of pivotal change, and novella seems uniquely suited to that. I think I'd like to write novellas in this setup rather than a sort of big novel, which would be more expansive. There's a short story out there as well called Taking Flight, which is in this milieu. And again, the sort of theme is more how this situation corrodes, or what kind of relationships it means within a society like this? How can people relate when there's a certain kind of unfreedom, the burden of which is felt by one group more than another? So that was the sort of thing I think I was mostly interested in exploring, and particularly the limits of somebody well-meaning who actually on the whole has done a really good job, Yeah.
Well, that was sort of what was interesting about it is, she has, there's this underclass basically, and she's participating, and she tries to be kind to her guy and treat him like a person, or as much like a person as it's possible for her to do with her mindset. But at the end, it definitely felt like she kind of knew it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely not. No. Hopefully, it feels really dangerous that moment. He could. They're very isolated where they are, and it's a revelation to her. The other character I think is quite good. There is the woman who's been looking after her mother, where that ends. You think, oh my God, she'd happily stick a knife in both of you. It really hates you, but you've not had to deal with that.
Right.
So the way Monica is implicated in this, despite everything she does and has done, was something I really wanted to kind of interrogate.
Yeah.
And that's liberal feminism in many ways. Yeah.
That's a rough mirror.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm glad I'm glad you found it readable. And I'm glad it made you think. I'm glad it was and your question's really interesting about what did you want us to feel about her, because it should be complicated, I think. Really good fiction should leave you with those questions. Was I right to like this person? Like we are in real life. I really like that person, but they really have this blind spot, or I can't stand this person, but maybe they have a point. Yeah.
Yeah. This person believes some really terrible stuff, but they also do some really wonderful things. So where do I...
How do I negotiate that?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we all want to feel good about ourselves, ultimately.
We do. Yeah. We're all fragile creatures.
We really are. Writers most. That's why we sit alone in rooms. And then put all our thoughts out for people to say, I hated this.
Yeah. Part of what I hoped to do in actually doing this podcast was actually just forcing myself to have conversations with people. And so far that's been working. The other goal of it was to have conversations with interesting people who were doing really interesting things, and also mission accomplished. So
excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
So typically at the end I do a lightning round, which is just sort of fun, particularly if we've gone someplace serious. It's nice to end on a fun note.
Absolutely.
So I think we're going to do this with Trek characters. And you need to pick which Trek character you would rather have with you in the following situations.
Okay. I won't just say Garrick. But I might just say Garrick.
Well, I'm sure Garrick will be a valid answer on at least one of these.
Okay.
So the first one is Dinner at Buckingham Palace.
Dinner at Buckingham Palace. Oh, well, I'd take Bashir. Yeah, he'd be lovely company. Yeah,
okay.
Be delightful.
Absolutely. Yes. Trapped on a deserted island.
Trapped on a deserted island, I would say Picard, because he's as introverted as I am, so he wouldn't bother me. And then when he did want to talk to me, it would be interesting. And also, he's a Starfleet admiral, so someone is looking for him. So Picard.
Okay. Good
Spock.
answer.
Spock could you could say Spock there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
At a table in a boardroom full of lawyers.
Spock. He'd pulverize them.
Okay. On the line in a haute cuisine French kitchen.
On the Janeway. Yeah. She'd be running it fairly. And she wouldn't shirk her she wouldn't shirk her work, I think. You wouldn't end up chopping her vegetables. Or Cisco. Cisco might be useful there. Yeah.
I think both of them seem like they would know what to do with a knife.
Exactly. Yes. Plenty of things to do with the knife.
In a prison riot.
Oh, Garrick.
See, I said he was going to be the right answer to at least one of these.
Yeah, it's like, how do we get out of this alive? And he would know. He would already know the routes out.
Of course,
he'd know where to hide.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
Usually,
if he hadn't instigated it.
Well, I mean, maybe even if he did.
If he did, he does have a tendency to get punched. But there you go.
But he's usually asking for it. So
it definitely usually asking for it.
Okay, at a high stakes blackjack table.
High stakes blackjack table. Data.
Yeah.
Data would.
Okay. 2 bonus questions for time travel shenanigans thrown back in time to a town in the Old West.
A town in the Old West. Time travel shenanigans to the Old West. Oh, that's a tricky one. I think Crusher. I think Crusher would be quite good fun for that. I think we'd see a side of Crusher we hadn't seen before. Also, it's handy to have a doctor.
That's quite true.
Yeah. But I think she'd be. I think she'd show a raffish side, a rascally side. Yep.
Oh boy! Well, somebody's going to have to write that.
There is a Star Trek novel, Time Travel in the Wild West, isn't there? Barbara Hambly's. Is it Ishmael? I think it's called.
Oh, is it with Crusher though?
No. It's Kirk and Spock.
Yeah,
it's a Spock. It's a Spock backstory.
I specifically need Crusher.
Oh, with Crusher, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is I want someone to write that.
Yeah,
I don't
Crusher's
care if it's
underrated. Yeah,
fic or canon or what, but I need someone to write that.
Well, fandom, you can have that one for free.
All right. I'm too busy right now. It can't be me.
Okay.
But it's got to be someone. Okay. Last one. A pirate ship.
A pirate ship. Okay, I'm going to say Rom, because Ferenginar is effectively a pirate ship, and he ends up as boss.
Okay.
So I think he has ways of navigating pirate ships and getting out the other end. So how are those?
Valid. I love them all.
Excellent. Great questions.
Thank you. I'm going to sign off, and then I want to talk about something else for a second. So that is our show. You beautiful nerds, thanks for listening. Thanks, and check out all the links in the description below to follow Una's website and keep up with all the amazing things she's up to. If you haven't watched any of the Trek series that we talked about, what are you even doing with your life? As ever, the Geek Girls have all the goodies for you. So for best results, Insert in brain. Take care, take it easy, and stay geeky.